Morning, welcome to the Contemporary Issues Adult Sunday School class, where we talk about social issues from a Christian perspective. What a terrific turnout we have today, standing room only for our good speaker, TR Tom Reid. And I will introduce Tom a little more, his biography a little more in a few minutes. But thank you for coming to talk about Europe and maybe Ukraine a little bit today. We'll ask Tom his opinion on that too.
I
And
changed my,
yes,
Yeah.
yes, we are
I
gonna,
don't know enough about Europe.
he used to live in Europe, but
That's
it's
20
been
years ago. I don't
20
know.
years ago,
I
and
don't
so
know enough now.
we're not gonna discuss current events in great detail today, but we will talk, Tom is gonna talk about European healthcare, taxes, elections, things we can learn from the successes in Europe. So he'll talk for about 30 minutes and we'll discuss and have questions and comments for about 30 minutes. And so we'll have a great discussion. But first, I want to welcome any first timers that have been with us. Just want to see by show of hands, anybody first timer, welcome. My name is Steve, the leader of the class. Okay. And our usual request to our folks on Zoom, please mute yourself in the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking so we can keep the noise down. And we are recording this for future playback on YouTube for those who cannot be here at the moment. And other announcements, Frank.
I can authorize you as an election watcher. If you want to be an election watcher this election, see me after the class.
See Frank, that what about
later? Thank you.
election? Yes, 10 days out from that thing. Yes. And Alice wants to mention we have a class Christmas party coming up on December 12th.
And I've been getting questions about this booklet we're putting together, Memories and Recipes. It's all typed up and turned in to Kathy Rogers. So we should receive our copies the beginning of December. So if anybody wants to still submit, it's too late. Too late.
Okay, very good. As we go here, we may need to close the door to keep the noise out if folks are talking loud outside. Sorry for those who are trying to get in. We are, by the way, looking for a bigger room here at church. We're thinking about the small chapel in this hour, so we're not oblivious to the fact we are tight in this room. Okay, with that, other announcements or things in the news. We always take a minute, Tom, and talk about things in the news here. And with that today, I want to mention that Tom is a former reporter and editor from the Washington Post, was the bureau chief in London and Tokyo for the Washington Post. And I can relate to that because I was a reporter for the Kansas City Star for many years and love discussing social issues. But with news of the week, the Washington Post for the first time this week is to endorse a presidential candidate. And yes, people are saying that's because the new owner, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, is afraid of becoming an enemy of Trump. And so former editors there have been on TV. And so I just wanted to, and so I want to see what Tom thought about that. If you would share with us your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm have mixed feelings on this. I feel grateful to Jeff Bezos. He saved the Washington Post at a time when our paper was really in trouble, and the Graham family, the one Kay Graham, Catherine Graham, most powerful woman in America, blah, blah, blah. They were a wonderful family and great people to work for, but they didn't have the money to maintain the Washington Post. And Jeff Bezos came along, poured a lot of money into it. When he bought the paper, we were down to about 9 foreign bureaus. They're now 20, which he's banned for. And in a book that the former editor Marty Barron wrote, he said that Jeff Bezos basically left him alone. You report what you want. But now it does appear, according to the reporting on the Post, which must be right, it's America's greatest newspaper. Jeff Bezos was afraid. He got cowed before Trump, and if he's cowed before the election, what's that paper gonna do if Trump is president? It's really, really unfortunate. So I feel mixed about it, but it certainly has not turned out well for Jeff Bezos. He looks terrible. He looks cowardly, he looks stupid. And the paper is angry and the staff is angry, so it wasn't a good idea.
Is he the head of Amazon?
Yeah, he started.
He started
He started
Amazon.
it as a bookstore.
Yes, it's a bookstore that
He's
went
been a
wild.
brilliant businessman. Now he has a space agency that's competing with Musk and he has legitimate concerns about what the federal government could do to him, but still, as my son said, what's the point of being a billionaire if you have to be afraid of Donald Trump? You know, man is worth $150 billion. You think he could?
And on the other, Angeles Times declined to endorse just the last few days. Kamala Harris, because they were on the verge of doing that, had already written and decided that. The owner stepped in and said, I will not endorse in this race because Kamala Harris supports Israel too strongly. And in his opinion, he said the Israeli government is doing genocide on the children in Gaza. And so because she has not condemned that strong enough, in his opinion, he's not going to endorse in the presidential race. So interesting, we've never seen this before that I can remember, Tom, with major newspapers backing away from this kind of endorsement.
Well, certainly major newspapers have had rich owners who dictated whom you could endorse.
Yeah.
So they've probably also said you can't endorse, I guess. If
Follow
the owner says to the editorial page chairman, endorse Jones,
Yeah.
and the chairman says, no, I'm for Smith, and they could probably say, then you can't do anything. I think that's probably happened in the past. It used to be more acceptable for the owner to dictate what the reporters and the editors did. When I was at the Washington Post, and I covered the Dukakis campaign in 1988. He was running against the first George Bush. And Catherine Graham, the owner of our paper, was she was a very good friend of Barbara Bush, George Bush's wife, and therefore, and the Washington Post was a good Democratic newspaper. There was no way we could endorse George W. Bush, could we? And I was covering Dukakis. And I went out and Dukakis gave a very thoughtful speech about US-Russian relations. And I wrote a story saying the man gave a thoughtful speech. And the next morning, I happened to be back in Washington and was in the newsroom. And Kay Graham came up to me and said, oh, Tom, I read your piece on the Duke. Are you in the tank? Have you gone in the tank for the Duke? Because I wrote a piece saying he gave a thoughtful, intelligent speech, right? And I was furious. She had no right to say that to me. She had no right to say that to me. And so I marched right down to the editor's office. Ben Bradley was my boss, Benjamin Bradley, the same. And I said, you are not going to believe what Kay Graham just said to me. I was pissed. She didn't have the right to do that. And Bradley says to me, oh God, don't listen to Kay. That's the first thing I'll tell you. Don't listen to Kay. She's my owner, you know?
Yeah.
Of course I was. Anyway, so then I got back on the plane and we flew off at Dukakis for somewhere and ended the day in Boston. And I'm in a hotel in Boston at 1 a.m. and the phone rings in my hotel room. It's the hotel operator says, you have a message here. Call Mrs. Graham at home, no matter how late.
Yeah.
Well, so first I wrote down her home phone number in my diary, so I didn't have it.
Very good.
And then I called and some butler answers. It's
Yeah.
like 1 a.m. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean, I'll call in the morning. He said, oh, is this Mr. Reid? Just a minute. And Kay Graham comes to the phone and says, Tom, you're doing a wonderful job. I didn't have anything to say to you. Cover it your way. So Bradley told her,
Yeah.
you leave my reporter alone. That's the way it was at the Washington Post. I guess not now.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, not too long here, but I do want to ask you real quick. Of course, the Washington Post is the Woodward and Bernstein place that broke the Watergate story. Did you know Woodward and Bernstein and worked with them, Tom, in your time there?
Yeah, I knew both Bob and Carl. I knew Bob quite well, and he's kind of hard to know. He's a kind of an off person. He's on his own. Carl was a very friendly, easygoing guy. Yeah, so I knew them, and of course they made the Washington Post, and I subsequently worked for the Washington Post in Japan, China, and London, and in Tokyo, when I would say I'm from the Washington Post, I'm from the Washington Post, they would say, Wotageto.
Yeah.
So it kind of made our
Yeah.
paper. I think we all feel grateful to them for that.
Tito.
Yep.
Okay, quick biography of Mr. Reid. Denver resident, journalist, documentarian Tom Reid wrote the United States of Europe book here 20 years ago now, in which he said that the European Union of 25 countries has more people and wealth than the United States and wants to be the next great superpower. So we might follow up with Tom and ask how that has played out. He has been the bureau chief in London, Tokyo, and Denver for the Washington Post. His PBS film, U.S. Healthcare, The Good News, was broadcast around the country, and his book, The Healing of America, also outlined this topic. And he spoke to us at a breakfast here at St. Andrew a few weeks ago about this topic. He's also the chair of the board of Colorado Coalition for the Homeless and chairman of the Colorado Foundation for Universal Health Care. And with that, please welcome Tom Reid.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everybody. Thanks for bringing me to this huge, beautiful church. What a beautiful church. And bringing me back to Douglas County. 40 years ago, my family lived in Douglas County. We lived on Wolfenberger Road out west of Castle Rock. At that time, Douglas County, 1980 census, I think the population was 22,000 of our county. Today it's 400,000. When I lived here, there was no Highlands Ranch, no Lone Tree. Somebody was thinking of putting a golf course around Castle Pines. It's really different. So it's nice to come back, and it's really exciting to see. All right, so I'm not going to talk too much about Europe because I haven't lived in Europe for 20 years. And incidentally, my book says that the coming of the European Union has ended wars in Europe. So I think maybe I wasn't so prescient as I thought. No, here's what I want to talk about. You may not have noticed, but there's going to be an election here in 10 days. And one of the candidates has said that the United States, our country, is a failing nation. The United States is a garbage can. The United States is a nation in decline. The United States is the laughing stock of the world, one candidate says. I just want to take a look today and see if that's accurate. Is that right, or are we the greatest nation in the world? I personally come down a little more on the greatest nation side for the following reason. The United States is the third most populous country in the world after India and China. I think Indonesia is fourth. We are clearly the richest country in the world by gross domestic product, our total output. We're by far the richest country in the world. China is number two. Its GDP is 25% less than ours. Japan and Germany are tied at number three, and they're 40% smaller than we are. Most countries have half our GDP. We're clearly the richest country in the world. We're the strongest, most powerful country in the world. There's no country that can match our military prowess or our military power. When I was in the U.S. Navy, my last couple of years in the Navy, my job was writing the admiral's testimony to Congress every year when they asked for more money. And they always said, oh, God, the Russian Navy, oh, God, the Chinese Navy. But it was never true. We have vastly more military power. We're the most powerful country in the world. I think you could say we're the freest country in the world. I think we'll protect individual liberty, particularly freedom of speech, freedom of religion better than almost any country. Scandinavian
Yeah.
countries are pretty free.
Yeah.
We're clearly the most innovative country in the world in America. Artificial intelligence, science, the internet, all modern technologies. The United States clearly leads the world in that field. Just last 2 weeks, the Nobel Prizes were announced. 10 scientists and economists got them. 7 were Americans or working at American universities, and that's always the case with the Nobel Prizes. In science and technology, we clearly lead the world in medical science. All over the world, people who would have been dead 20 years ago are walking around fine because of some treatment or some drug that was developed in the United States. Culturally, American movies, American pop music, American books, American TV shows, everywhere you go in the world, we are the dominant cultural force. So I think in many ways you could say, yeah, we're number one. Americans like to fill stadiums and chant USA, USA, we're number one. And in many ways that's true. But there's some areas where we're not the best, where we really lag behind other nations like us. I would say, I'm talking here about modern, high-tech, advanced, industrialized democracies, countries like us. This would be Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, countries like that. There are about 35 of these industrialized democracies in the world. And my argument to you today is, even though I think we are the greatest country in the world, there are many areas where we could do better and we could learn from these other countries. And this has been kind of a hobby horse of mine for some time. I've written several books arguing what we could learn from other countries. Incidentally, my publishers asked me to point out that my books make great Christmas giving. Your mother-in-law will want to read about tax policy, don't you?
Right.
So let me just talk about a few of the areas where I think we could do better by learning from other countries. Let's start with healthcare. As I said, the United States leads the world we have the best medical schools, the best nursing and public health schools. We lead the world in medical and pharmaceutical research. And yet, when it comes to keeping people healthy, the world's richest country is a fourth-rate power. All the other countries like us, industrialized democracies, are doing better at keeping people healthy. All of them have a longer life expectancy. They have better recovery rates from most diseases and injuries. Most health statistics, they're doing better. There are several organizations around the world that do comparative studies. The World Health Organization, WHO, Harvard Medical School. I tend to rely on an organization in New York City called the Commonwealth Fund. It's an excellent group of people. And they do comparative studies every year. And last month, they released their comparative study for 2023 of healthcare in the 11 richest countries. The 11 richest countries in the world in terms of overall population health, treatment, recovery rates from disease and injury. And guess what? The mighty United States, out of 11 countries, we came in 11th. And we always come in 11th or 12th or 13th. In some areas, get this, the one that really bugs me is something called neonatal mortality. Neonatal mortality means a baby dies before her first birthday. Now, you would think the United States could keep babies alive until their first birthday. Of the 23 richest countries, we rate last. We rate last in keeping people alive, keeping newborn babies alive. And neomaternal mortality, this is women dying within a year of giving birth, 23rd out of 23. We're the worst. Now, how can it be when I just said we have the best medical research and training in the world? And the answer is all the people that we do not provide care for, the people we leave out. According to the Congressional Budget Office, somewhere between 27 and 30 million Americans have no insurance. They can't afford to go to the doctor. They can't afford to take their kids to the doctor when the kid has strep. or an earache or something. Another 70 million Americans are what's called underinsured. This means they're paying a premium every month. And you know how American health insurance works. The deductibles and the copay are so high that the insurance company never pays a bill and people can't afford to go to the doctor. And this is why our statistics are so poor. I wrote a book about this. Is this it? Yeah, Healing of America. And what I did is I went around the world. I went to 15 countries that are doing better than we do, that always rate higher, to see, well, how do they do it? How do they, and one of the questions I asked prime ministers, health ministers, doctors, economists, why do you do this? Why do you provide health care for everybody? And the first answer I got in most cases was, why don't you? It's so obvious that you want to provide healthcare to people who need it. It saves lives, it saves money. And of course, I think the main reason in most countries is the moral imperative. So here we are in a church, and I just want to bring up the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel. This is where the disciples asked Jesus, what does it take to get into heaven? What does it take to be a good person? And Jesus gives one of his fabulous answers. He says, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick, you came and cared for me. It's a moral obligation to care for each other, and we don't do it. And we could learn from other countries how to provide health care for everybody. We ought to do it. All right, so that's one area where I think we are not the greatest country in the world.
And it doesn't cost more.
It definitely costs less. There's no question. If you read my book, now available in paperback. This book is, yeah, it's definitely on Kindle. Yeah, it's still selling. It's kind of amazing. It came out 10 years ago.
So Obamacare didn't close that gap?
No, Obama promised that he was going to provide health care for everybody, but then the way he did it was he decided to provide subsidized private insurance. And that's a very, very expensive way to provide health insurance. American private insurers are the least efficient, most expensive insurers in the world. And therefore he couldn't afford, we didn't have the money. So that's why when Obamacare passed, there were 48 million Americans without health insurance. Today, the number is about 30 million. It went down to 25 million because they expanded Medicaid during COVID, but now that expansion is about 30 million. The answer is all the countries that provide health care for everybody spend less. And that's not a coincidence. A coordinated, intelligent, universal system that covers everybody will always be cheaper than the fragmented, crazy quilt, nutty system that we're relying on. So yeah, we would save lives, we would save money, and we'd meet our basic moral obligation as human beings. All right.
You talk to the American Medical Association?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, doctors agree with me. Doctors think, any doctors here, the doctors all agree we should provide healthcare for everybody. Dr. Irene Aguilar, who was at Denver Health, is a good friend of mine, and she got into this effort to try to bring universal health care. And I asked her once why, and she told me why. She was at Denver Health, and a woman came in who had not been to a doctor in a long time. And Irene checked her out. She had 3 comorbidities. She had 3 serious illnesses. And Irene said to her, I'm going to give you 3 pills, and it's very important you take each one of them every day. And the answer was, Doc, just tell me the worst one. I can only afford one of them. Wow. That's US healthcare. Okay, let me move on now. Steve's not giving me much time here, so we have. Another area where the US is not the greatest country in the world is crime. We have very high crime rates relative to other advanced democracies like the United States, like Western Europe, South Korea, Japan, Australia, etc. Let me just read you some murder rates. This is the number of murders per 100,000 people, okay? Poland, 0.68, less than 1. Italy, 0.55. Denmark, 1.01 murder per 100,000 people. Canada 2.2, France 1.5, Japan 0.23, the safest country in the world. United Kingdom, Britain 1.15 murders per 100,000, United States 6.38. Now, we are not the worst. The worst murder rates in the world are found in Latin American countries. Mexico, 32.2 murders per 100,000. Colombia, 13.2, Panama, 11.32. Murders tend to be found in countries that have an illegal drug industry, a lot of guns, and or no government. For example, Haiti and Venezuela have high murder rates because they really don't have a functioning government. A big problem in the United States is that we have taken our Second Amendment, which says a well-regulated militia being necessary for a strong government. We have the right to keep and bear arms. And the Supreme Court in the Heller case, Justice Scalia just ignored the well-regulated militia part. He said, really, the Second Amendment was about self-defense, which is not mentioned in the Second Amendment. So we have more guns. I've been writing these books. Have I mentioned my books? I've been writing these books about what we can learn from other countries. And my healthcare book, this one really sold like mad. My publisher was just delighted about it. It's really sold like mad. And so the publisher, Random House, called me in, Ann Godoff, the president of Random House, called me to New York and said, what are we going to do next? We got to do another one of these comparative books. And the first one we thought of was guns. So I went out and researched guns around the world. It turns out to be a 2-chapter book. One is the United States and Yemen, and the other is everybody else. Nobody else allows crazy people to go out and buy assault rifles the way we do.
Are your books in our library?
I hope not. I think they're in the bookstore. Yeah, oh, good. No, they should be in the library. All my books are in the public library. You don't have to buy them. So even though we are a rich democracy, a functioning country with a good government, we do have these high rates of crime that are unthinkable. I realized this first when my family moved from Castle Rock, Colorado, population 7,500, to Tokyo, population 27 million. And my daughter Willa was, when she was 6 years old, she was friendly with our next door neighbor, and she and Mariko, the 6-year-old next door, after dinner one night, this is about 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night, it's dark. And Willa says, Mariko and I are gonna walk to the store. Well, no, it's 8 o'clock at night. It's a city of 27 million people. It's dark out there. So I went next door to talk to Matsuda-san, my next door neighbor, Mariko's father. And I said, hey, the girls are talking about walking to the store. Yeah. I said, are you going with them? And he says, why? Why? It's dark. They're 6 years old. It's a half a mile to the store. They're 20. No, there is no reason in Tokyo. And of course they did go, and they came back, and Willa came back with some Japanese candy with a big smile. It's fine. You can walk down the street at 6 years old in Japan because nothing's going to happen to you. While we were living in Japan, my mom called me from Michigan. She was 86 at the time, and she kind of casually said, oh yeah, the other day she got mugged in the parking lot of a shopping center. And I was really upset by this. I was, oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. My mom says, Tommy, don't worry. These things happen. No, in Japan, they don't happen. 86-year-old women don't get mugged in Japan. While I was in Japan, there was this terrible case of 2 Japanese grad students in Los Angeles, and some guy came and they were stopped at a red light in their car. Guy came and shot them to steal the car. And this made about page 38 of the American newspapers. It happens, it's not news. In Japan, this was huge news that this happened. And a guy from the Yomiuri Shimbun, the biggest newspaper in Japan, called me up and said, Rito-san, what is kajak? what is kajak?
Oh, my check, yeah.
Oh, I said, oh, yeah, carjacking. I said, you know what carjacking, it's when you're stopped at a red light and a guy comes up with a gun and shoots you and takes your car.
Mhm.
And he says, that happens?
Yeah.
It has never happened in Japan. There had never been a carjacking. So crime is worse in the United States than in other countries. We are not the leader in this area, which I learned living in Japan. Now, here's one area of crime that only matters to authors like me. I was in Shanghai a few years ago doing a story, and I went into a bookstore and I found this. This is my book, my Europe book, right? And as you can see, it's a pretty handsome, it's a very nice Chinese edition.
Yeah.
It says, I don't know if you can see it says by T.A. Rido. And then it lists 3 translators. And they did a nice job on it. It's a handsome book. And so when I got home, I called my agent and said, hey, where are the royalties for my Chinese edition?
Right. Yeah.
They don't give royalties, they just steal your book. So there's a form of crime we don't have that they, and it only matters to authors.
Right.
Another area where I think we could learn from other countries is elections. Our current election is going to end in 10 days, thank God.
Yeah.
It basically started in April of 2023 when the first Republican candidates announced. It's been going on for 19 months, fairly steadily. Most of the other democracies, an election campaign lasts 3 to 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Now, they are politicking all the time. Believe me, they're criticizing each other, they're trashing the other party. But in the parliamentary democracies, the prime minister declares an election, and by law, election day has to be 3 weeks later. So they've restricted it. And then another thing they don't have is, guess what? No negative ads.
Yeah.
Because they don't have TV ads, and the reason for that is they don't have the money to pay for
Right.
TV ads because all the other countries restrict how much money can go into an election.
There you go.
The United States is the only democracy where our Supreme Court has ruled in the Citizens United case that giving money to a candidate is the same thing as speech, and therefore there's no limit on it. I just read in the paper yesterday, Elon Musk allegedly has given $100 million
Yes.
to the Trump campaign. Bill Gates has given $50 million to the Harris campaign. There's no country in the world that would let somebody give $100 million to a candidate.
Feed a lot of mouths.
Yeah, exactly. You could do better things with that money. This is just a huge difference. Canada does allow political contributions, but guess what? The limit is not $100 million. It's not $50 million. It's 4,500 is the most you can give. And we used to have that. And these countries are serious about this. When I was in Britain, there was a case, I wrote a story about this, to run for a seat in the British Parliament, what they call the mother of democracies, right? The mother of parliaments. The limit, the spending limit, the most you could spend was about $36,000 in the whole campaign. It's a 3-week campaign. And they found a woman who got elected, and she had spent more than that, and they kicked her out.
Oh, wow.
And they were serious. So this is a big difference. Now, our elections are freewheeling. They can be fun. They go on way too long and vastly too much money. And if I ever see another Gabe Evans or Caraveo ad,
Oh, my goodness.
I went to a fundraiser on Wednesday. So 13 days before the election, this Wednesday, I went to a fundraiser and for a congressional candidate, and she said she needed $3 million more. There were 2 weeks left in the campaign. Every minute of ad time has been bought. But she could raise anyway. This is a big difference, and I don't think we're doing this as well as other countries. Another area where we've really screwed up, I think, relative to other countries is taxes. Our tax system is ridiculously, absurdly, outrageously complicated. It's by far the most complicated tax system in the world, and it doesn't have to be. Many countries have made it simpler. I wrote a book about this. I was visiting, I told you, I went to Ann Godoff's, my healthcare book really sold. I wrote this book about crime in the Asia, other countries, how they have less crime. And these books both sold quite well, and Ann was very pleased about it. So she said, let's do another one. So first we were going to do guns, and I said, that turns out to be a 2-chapter book. Then we were going to do aging around the world, which I'll get to in a minute, because I think other countries have handled that pretty well. And we hit on taxes, because I really like tax policy. And I did do a book on taxes around the world. I just want to point out, this book got really good reviews, didn't sell a copy. Total flop in the market. But I want to just read for you an example of what we have done relative to other countries. So most countries have set up a system looking ahead to your retirement, where if you save for your retirement, you get a tax deduction for that, or a tax break. It's called a tax-free savings account. So here's what's happened in America. There's a bewildering variety of different plans with names that sound like secret code. The 401k, the 403b, the 457b, the SEP, the SARSEP, the ESOP, and so on. There's an IRA, and there's a Roth IRA, which is completely different. And then there's a My IRA, which is different from the other two. There's something called a, quote, non-qualified deferred compensation plan, whatever that means. One of the saving vehicles in our tax code is called the Simple IRA. The Simple IRA requires 2 different IRS forms, Form 5304 and 5305, and a 12-page book of instructions. Now, most other countries have also done tax-deferred savings accounts because it makes sense, right? In Canada, for example, the tax-free savings account is called the tax-free savings account. There's only one. There's only one. Anybody can use it. You can put the money into any bank or investment account. You can deposit and withdraw at any time. The interest and dividends are always tax-free. That's it. That's how they did it. And this is how we did it. Nowadays in America, you actually have to hire an advisor to figure out how to put money in a savings account. It's ridiculous. So we have made it incredibly complicated. When I was writing this book, there's an office in the IRS called the Taxpayer Advocate's Office. And I got very friendly with this woman who ran this. She's really a good lady. And one point I said to her, hey, there's a point in my book where I need an IRS instruction that is so complicated, it's funny. And she says to me, but there's so many of those. Here, I'll read you.
You have trouble finding it?
Can I read you a couple? Listen to this one. Combine lines 1 through 17, enter here and on schedule M3 part 2, line 27, reporting positive amounts as negative and negative amounts as positive. That's a real IRS instruction. I have a whole bunch of them in my book. Now, let's look at other countries. So I did this book, and the way I do these comparative books is I hire reporters in each of the countries to help me. And I have a guy in Japan that I have hired for several of my books, Togo Shigehiko. Togo is a really good guy. And I was in Japan about the last week of March. Tax day in Japan is April 1st. And I said to Togo, I said, Shige-san, I want to watch you fill out your tax return and see how hard it is. And he says to me, fill out my tax return, fill out my Seikin Sho Kakeru Kana. He had no idea what I meant. And I said, well, you know, when you file, so no, you don't do that, because in Japan, the tax authority, Kokuzeicho, the tax agency, fills out the form for you. They have all the numbers. They know how much you earn. They know how much you withheld. They know how much you paid in mortgage. They have all the numbers. They fill out the form for you. They send you a postcard in mid-March, and it says, we think you earned this much. We withheld this much. We owe you a refund of this much. It'll be in your bank on April 1st. Or you owe us this much, and we're going to take it from your bank account on April 1st. And then it says, if you agree with this, do nothing. And if you don't agree, you can file a return. That's how you do taxes. It takes 2 minutes. do your taxes in Japan. I was in the Netherlands on March 31st. Their tax day is also April 1st with a guy, Michael Spears. He was a corporate executive. He had an income of 200,000 euros, maybe $250,000. He's a pretty rich guy. He had rental properties. He would have to fill out 12 different forms in the United States.
Right.
Next day was tax day in the Netherlands, and I said, Michael, have you filed your taxes? No, I'll get around to it. Anyway, it turns out he goes online about 9 p.m. the night before. The tax authority has already filled out the form, both for his state and federal taxes in the Netherlands. And he says to me, he says, sometimes I look at those numbers and they look right, and I start checking, and now he's getting really pissed off. He says, sometimes it takes me like half an hour just
Yes.
and guess what? It turns out that the IRS, our revenue agency, has the necessary data for about 70 to 80% of all American families. They could fill out the form for us. If you don't like it, throw it away and fill out your own. But we don't do that. And guess what? When this is proposed in Congress every year, that Congress fill out our tax returns, H&R Block and Intuit
Yeah, right.
lobby against it
Mhm.
successfully. Yeah.
Are you going to talk about what taxation you feel is the fairest?
Yeah, well, I think another area that I discuss in this book is we have missed out on the most important, the best tax invention of the 20th century, the last 50 years. This is called the value added tax, the VAT.
Oh, yeah.
The VAT is kind of a sales tax on steroids. And it was invented in France in the 1950s. Now 130 countries around the world have it. All the advanced democracies have it except the United States. It's a very good tax because it doesn't tax savings, it doesn't tax labor, it doesn't tax investment, it taxes consumption. And I won't go, it's described in I don't have time to go into it here, but it's a self-policing tax. It's very, very hard to evade and very easy to collect. And therefore, economists like it, tax collectors like it. Conservatives don't like it because it's an easy tax to raise. So if you buy a book in the United States, did I mention that buying a book? You buy one of my books, it costs $20.
Yeah.
But in Colorado, it's going to cost you $21.60 because of the sales tax.
Okay.
But it says $20 on the book, so
Right.
you've just paid. But when I buy a book in Britain for 25 pounds, it costs 25 pounds. Well, the real price of the book was $22.30, and the rest was the VAT, but that's hidden in there.
Yeah.
So you can raise the tax very easily, and people blame the publisher, or they blame the food company or the auto company because they don't realize they're paying more tax. So conservatives hate it. The Wall Street Journal calls the VAT a money machine. And that's bad, right?
Yeah.
Liberals like it because it raises money without getting people angry. So, but economists like it for the reasons I just stated. So I think the VAT is a very good tax. We ought to have one, and we won't.
Right.
It's just too hard.
We've got about 13 minutes left if you want to leave time for general questions.
Okay, I got one more thing I want to talk about, and that is aging society. We are an aging society, like all the rich democracies are aging societies. And I think other countries are doing a really good job of adjusting to this better than the United States. Japan is the oldest country in the world. And I've written a lot about aging in Japan. So in Japan, you go to the intersection, and you can push a button on the street light that says for a walk signal, right?
Yeah.
In Japan, they have a second button for slower.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
So for ordinary people, up to age 60, in Japan, there's a bank of elevators, and there's one that's restricted for wheelchairs and walkers.
Oh.
So that it's bigger.
Yeah.
So people can get in. I was in a bank, and last time I was in Japan, I went to my bank to get some yen out, and I'm filling out the documents on the counter, and somebody had forgotten their glasses. There's a pair of glasses there. So I took them up to the clerk and said, hey, somebody forgot these glasses. No, Nobody forgot them. They leave the glasses there because people need them, reading glasses. And as a matter of fact, any bank, any post office, any store in Japan, if you have to write something down, they have the glasses on the table. I just want to point out,
Yeah, here you're lucky to get a pen.
I think you have heard of manga. Manga are these Japanese comic stories. They're graphic novels.
Mhm.
I'm crazy about them. I read them like mad. And this one is, as you can see, it's called it's Tasogare Jusei Gun, like shooting stars in twilight. And this is a series of stories about elderly people age 60 or 70 who fall in love. Isn't that nice?
Yeah.
And this is this comic appears bi-weekly, and this is number 54. 54 compilations. They're huge bestsellers, and they have stories like in this particular volume. There's one where a guy is 70 years old and he's retired and he's kind of bored, so he wants a part-time job, and he gets a job as a chauffeur, as a driver for a corporate vice president. And the corporate vice president turns out to be a 60-year-old woman. And she has spent her whole career building her career, never had time for love. And the two of them get to be very friendly, the chauffeur and the vice president in the backseat. And one night he's driving her home from work, and they're passing a building with a big red sign, and that means something in Japan. It's a love hotel. And she says, turn left here. And they go in for 2 hours. I don't know if you can see this couple here?
Yeah.
This one I really like, this is my favorite one. So in this one, this woman is having, she's in her 40s, and she's having an affair with a 40-year-old guy, and she happens to meet his father, who's 77, right?
Yeah.
And guess what? They strike up, the 77-year-old and the 40-year-old. And finally, the son, who thinks that she's his girlfriend, finds out and says to her,
Yeah.
are you doing something with my dad?
Mhm.
And she says to him, she says, well, as a matter of fact, you know, in techniku, she says, he's better than you. They tend to use English words for these sexual. And then she says, and also in Saizu. So, what I'm arguing is other. My argument is, we are the greatest country in the world in many important measures. We are not a failing nation. We are not the laughing stock of the world. But there are several areas of public policy where we could do better if we were willing to learn from the other advanced democracies. Very nice.
Good, very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay.
I love the way you phrased that. It's so complimentary to America. Grant in the back.
Did you do any studies on educational systems in the different countries?
No, I didn't do that. It's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that, whether their education systems are better than ours. It's been done. People have done those studies, but I didn't. I'm sorry, I don't know enough.
I want to ask Tom about Ukraine. I know you're not an expert, Tom, on it, but what do you think of the war now? And is Europe doing enough to support Ukraine? And how do you think that whole war is going to turn out? What's your opinion?
I feel terrible about it because Putin invaded a democratic country, it shouldn't be allowed as a violation of morality and public and international law. I think the Europeans have really stepped up. They don't have the kind of military prowess that we do. They don't have the money that we do, but they have really stepped up and are giving money. And I think it would be terrible if we were to negotiate this such that Russia got to keep what it has taken already. But I don't know how to help Ukraine win. Biden has been afraid of giving them more weapons because they're afraid we'll get in a war with Russia.
Yeah.
On the other hand is, Kamala Harris says if Putin gets Ukraine, he will next take Poland,
Yeah.
which is arguably true.
Yeah.
So I'm very worried about it. I hope we can find a way to make it too painful for Russia to continue and have them drop. Trump says he can solve the war in 24 hours.
Right.
That seems to be mainly by leaning on Ukraine to
Yeah.
give in,
Exactly.
which I do not personally consider to be a good solution.
Eric first and then you can, go ahead.
This week, Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, went to India to recruit, because Germany's short on skilled workers.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
My question is, what,
back here.
yeah.
my question is, what did you do in the Navy?
What did I do in the Navy? He said, well, first I was on a nuclear sub. I was on the USS Silversides, SSN 679. It's incredibly boring. The World War II subs that we see in the movies, they could submerge for about 2 hours and run on battery power. Then they had to come back up and recharge the battery. The beauty of a nuclear sub is it goes under for 30 days and doesn't come back, and it doesn't need oxygen. And and if you happen to be a sailor on this ship, it's really boring. I mean, we had Liberty, and the Liberty was they would put up the periscope off of Hollyhock, Scotland, and we got to look through the periscope. It was called Periscope Liberty, and that was Liberty on the ship. On the other hand, you go out for 30 days, they have 2 crews. You go out for 30 days, you come in for 30 days, and the other crew goes out. And a lot of guys said to me, they thought it was good for their marriage, that they were gone for 30 days. So I was on this sub for a while and was bored. About every other day, they would say, now hear this, now hear this. Russian sub sighted 2,500 yards, 182.3 degrees. And it was always a drill. We never saw any Russian sub or anything. There was one time when I was on this sub and it said, now hear this, now hear this. We have just passed 171 degrees longitude. And all the sailors cheered. And the reason was that got us within 100 miles of Vietnam, and we all got combat pay for a month. For being within 100 miles. And then we sailed right back out.
Yeah.
I had no idea what the hell was going on, but the sailors knew.
Cool.
So that was a popular thing
Yeah.
for the CO to do.
Yeah.
And that probably wasn't approved. Anyway, after that, after that, I was called once while we were on shore on our 30 days off. I was called in by the XO, the executive officer. He said, you're going to Washington tomorrow. Oh, why?
Yeah.
Well, just go. So
Yeah.
I went to Washington and I was called in to meet Admiral Rickover. Hyman Rickover was the guy who invented the nuclear navy. I don't know if you know this.
Oh, yeah.
He was a US Navy admiral, and he was a Jew. Those two didn't go together. The Navy officer corps was pretty anti-Semitic. There were very few Jews. I think he said there were 2 Jews out of 500 guys in his class at the Naval Academy.
Yeah.
And he always felt that they treated him wrongly. They didn't, and during World War II, he was by then a captain. And of course, he wanted a command at sea.
Yeah.
And instead, they gave him shore duty. And the shore duty they gave him was they sent him to Tennessee to look at the Manhattan Project, where we were developing the atomic
Oak
bomb
Ridge.
at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And it was a nothing assignment, and that's why they gave it to him. And while he was there, he figured out that he could take the power we were developing for an atomic bomb and drive a ship with it. Crazy idea, nutty idea. And I became his speechwriter. That's what he wanted. He needed, I had been writing for my college newspaper. He needed a writer because he was a brilliant politician. Anyway, there are 2 kinds of nuclear subs. There are attack subs.
Right.
They're small subs that go out, they hide underwater and shoot torpedoes at Russians, right? And then there are the missile subs. And these are, we have a nuclear missile triad. We have bombers with nuclear bombs. We have missiles under the ground in North Dakota. And then we have the nuclear subs with missiles on them, the Trident subs they're called. And they're hiding underwater. And the Russians know where the missile bases are in North Dakota. they generally know where our planes are, but they can't find our subs. So this is a very important part of our nuclear triad. Those guys go underwater for 90 days. Even worse. Anyway,
Yeah.
Rickover had this idea that he wanted to build these missile subs. And when I was there, they only had attack subs, and they're very expensive ships. They're very expensive. So he had to convince Congress, and he came up with this idea. He wanted 41 of them, and he named each one for a famous guy from each state. So there's a USS Sacagawea for whatever state she was from. There's a USS Kilauea, something, the King of Hawaii. And he wrote a book. He wrote a chapter about each of the namesakes, and I wrote that book for him.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
my-
wow.
That was my job. So that's what I did in the Navy. And meanwhile, the Vietnam War was winding down. The guys in the Army and the guys in the Air Force were all getting out, but the Navy was shipping all the stuff home from Vietnam. So guys like me could not get out. So I was on this status called involuntary extension. Involuntary. And as I told Steve, another guy who was there in the Navy with me
Voluntary servitude.
was Sherrod Brown, a very nice guy named Sherrod Brown. He too was on involuntary extension. I signed up for 3 years in the Navy. I served more than 6 because I couldn't get out. And one day, Sherrod Brown came to me, and he was also in Rickover's Corps, and he said, "Hey, the Dallas Cowboys signed Roger Staubach." What the hell do I care? I don't care about Dallas. He says, no, don't you see? He was a Naval Academy grad.
Right.
He was an officer on involuntary extension.
Yeah.
And Dallas finally said to the Navy, if he can't play this season, we don't want him. He'll be too old.
Yeah.
And the Navy wanted their guy in the NFL, so they let him out. And Sherrod says to me, if one of us gets out, we all get out.
Oh, wow.
And today Sherrod Brown is the senator from Ohio.
Running, yeah.
Every time he runs, it costs me thousands of dollars. He got me out of the Navy. So anyway, that was my job in the Navy. I'm more than you want to know, but that's what I did.
We're about out of time. We do one more
Sorry.
question, and that's normal.
Yeah.
You did not mention, and I care very much about this, the number one cause of death for children
Yeah.
is guns.
Yeah. No, guns is a really serious problem in no other country, other than Yemen allows people to own guns in the way we do, and these assault rifles. You know, when I was in the Navy, I was trained on an AR-15. We had 3 training sessions before they ever issued us a bullet. But nowadays, you can go in and buy an AR-15 with no training whatsoever. When I was in Britain, they had a school shooting in Scotland. I don't know if you remember this. It was in 1997. A guy shot 6 students and 2 teachers. Man, crazy guy with a handgun. 2 weeks later, the parliament met and banned all handguns. You couldn't buy one and you couldn't own one. You had to turn it in. And some conservatives, this was Tony Blair's government, he was a liberal. Some conservatives said, we have a great hunting tradition. We have great gun makers, and we have great gun stores. You can't ban guns in Britain. And Tony Blair said, I got this on the front page of the Washington Post. He said, yes, we love our hunting traditions, but we love our children more. And they
New
passed.
Zealand did the same thing.
Yeah, New Zealand did the same thing. So you have one incident. We have 10 or 12 school shootings a year. They've had 1 in 27 years. So this is a fundamental difference. As I said, I think the interpretation of the Supreme Court that guns are for self-defense, it's not what the Second Amendment says. It says well-regulated militia. Yeah, thank you.
We have to wrap up. Thank you. Thanks for coming, everybody. Great, Tom. Thank you. You're a good storyteller.
Yeah.
Were you from the port on that? Open the first night and show them all. I was gonna show one at night. They only showed